Members of the Conservative Caucus are here today to hear from the people. The recent requirements for vaccination in order to maintain employment have raised concerns in the public. We are here to hear from those people that are impacted by those orders, hear their stories, and to hear what the impact would be on them, and to understand that and have a better understanding so that we can make better policy. That's part of our role here as legislators, is to ensure that we hear from the people. We have not had that opportunity in regular order, frankly, for the last year and a half, to have people in this building be able to come and seek redress with their government directly with their elected representatives. So our hope here today is to hear from the people, hear their stories directly related to the impacts that they're feeling based on the governor's executive orders related to their employment and the mandate to take the shot in order to maintain that employment.
I've worked at this bus company for 12, 13 years, and we're being told that we either need to take the vaccine or test, or we lose our jobs. Our union isn't sticking up for us. They're not fighting for us. I've been doing most of the research to help my coworkers.
Over the last few months, I've received half a dozen calls just about every weekday from people that are concerned about their jobs. They're concerned that they've worked. I had a gentleman yesterday contact me. He happens to be a constituent who's worked for his employer for 30 years and is now being told that he has to get vaccinated in order to maintain his job. He's been a good employee all that time. He has a union that represents him for those disputes between himself and his employer. His union won't do anything for him. So, I don't come to the table here today being anti-vax or anti-mask. I come pro-choice. One should have that choice in order to continue in their employment, but certainly for government to come in and to mandate certain things, because all of this stems from executive orders, orders of executive branches. It's not empowered by act of the legislature. The legislature hasn't had a public hearing, as Chair Mike France mentions, for about a year and a half now. The legislature has been sheepish and afraid to hear from the public with regard to these pandemic-related rules, executive orders. And we're here today not to prejudge, no preconceived notions, but to open the doors so that members of the public can come and explain their stories.
Me coming here today, I've been told that disciplinary action will be sought against me and my coworkers for standing up for our rights.
After hearing their stories, perhaps something could happen. We could employ that information in our future decisions. But, next week we're going to be voting on whether or not to extend those executive powers once again. And we think that the government that is provided by our Constitution should be restored, and look forward to hearing from members of the public.
I don't feel that there are clearly defined terms in the executive orders. I feel that there is been a precedent set for ambiguity, and this is kind of the Wild West of mandates right now. I think just everybody doesn't really know what lines they can push. And I feel that the governor is kind of being reckless with that. Because
the nurses, the teachers, the bus drivers, and many more who kept working during this pandemic. Those of us who were once called heroes, and now we're nothing, because we believe in the right of choice.
I believe the state of Connecticut should employ the constitutionally provided process and then ultimately vote on these things. That process would entail a committee convening, public health, for instance, maybe labor, and hearing from the public as to proposed legislation, voting on it, getting it out of committee, sending it to the House and the Senate, having them vote on it, and then ultimately get the governor's signature. Certainly these vaccine mandates have been talked about for a couple of months now. We could have gotten legislation done. We could have done the constitutionally provided process in that 2 months, and we would be in a different place now. The result, I may, and my fellow members of the Conservative Caucus may not be happy with, but at least that's the process.
All the hearts and thank yous, the chalk drawings and pictures all over our cities and towns might as well be taken down and thrown out. Because these same people who gave up everything to care for their fellow man are now scorned and escorted out of their place of work.
You're saying either you take this shot or you lose your ability to feed your family. It is that simple, with no choice, no option, and no alternative.
You know, you have the whole aspect of contract, where willing employer-employee get together, they've been working together, and now we have this major change in that contract. There's a whole other aspect of this. So I would have people have the choice, have that discussion, don't have the government behind the action of the employer. You know, from what I've seen, I've talked to some employers, they feel that what they're doing is supported by the government and certainly not supported by the legislature.
Because there's a lot being left up to interpretation.
Yeah,
And that's very dangerous.
And that's what I'd like to explore with you for a moment.
Sure.
So, understanding that the governor originally put out 13D, and then repealed that and put out 13G, which both of which have to do with vaccines. Okay, so
Okay.
right now we're under 13G, and you've mentioned that your employer is saying we have to do these things in order to comply.
Right.
Okay. So with regard to the testing verification section, which is, I know it's a B, it's 4B. What it says is that you have to submit to COVID-19 testing not less than once per week. So I've been sitting here for the last 20 minutes, so tell me, what does that mean? What's that period of time? Not less than once per week. Is it once per week? Is it 6 months? Is it 3 days? Well, it can't be 3 days because that would be less than 1 week, right?
Right.
So it could be 6 months, right?
Right.
Which is more than, because when you say not less than, right, it's a double negative.
Correct.
Which is exactly the point here.
Syntax matters.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Syntax, language.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been the problem throughout the pandemic. The governor issues an executive order. It's written in, that nobody can understand. People are having to interpret it. Employers are having to interpret it. So now your employer is telling you that if you opt out, that you have to get tested, but they can't figure out what not less than once per week is. They punt and they say it's got to be once per week, when in actuality it could be once every 3 months, based upon the executive order.
Right.
So what I'm hearing from you is that your employer's interpretation is that 7 days, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I would hope that when you're having these exchanges with your employer, you point out what the language actually says and what it actually means.
Well, you know, we are talking about, employer, employee. Those conversations are always difficult to navigate, especially when you're dealing with a global corporation that we work for.
Understood. And the point is that if the legislature was making these decisions, this language would come before a committee. That committee would say, this doesn't make sense, you need to rewrite it.
Mm-hmm.
And then language would get to House and Senate, and then ultimately the governor would sign it. But otherwise, everybody is left in a tizzy because they have no idea what the guidance is. So, next week, legislature will be voting to give the governor the power again.
We know this.
I hope that-
He's buttressed.
Well, you can contact your representatives and, tell them that this is the kind of stuff that creates problems.